By now, you should have a general understanding of non-permit required and permit required confined spaces. That said, depending on the hazards that have been identified, you may be required to take a few additional steps prior to entry. So let's spend the next few minutes thoroughly covering one of the most important requirements for ensuring a safe entry and exit of a confined space, the entry permit. At the University of Kentucky, we've identified and communicated all known confined spaces throughout our campus. So whether it's permit required or non-permit required, we recognize that each have their own hazards. That said, if you're going through this training, chances are you're either directly or indirectly exposed to one of those spaces. So as we said earlier, depending on those hazards, they may require your team to complete an entry permit before any work can be done inside the space. Now, the form you're probably most familiar with is this 2-page entry permit, which originates from the university's confined space program. That said, our university touches every county in the state of Kentucky. So if your entry permit looks slightly different, don't worry. While the aesthetics of the form may vary, the information that we're going to talk about should still be the same. So before diving in, let's break this training up and make it a little more digestible. Section 1, general information. Section 2, requirements. Section 3, atmospheric testing. Section 4, rescue. Section 5, authorization. And finally, Section 6, cancellation. I'll note as well, at the end of this training, there will be a quiz, so make sure you're paying attention. Section 1, general. This section of the entry permit wants to know basic information about the confined space, the work being done, and who's doing it. While that's essentially the gist of it, it's incredibly important to not take that lightly. You need to be as detailed and precise as you can possibly be. That's because this section serves several functions of our confined space program, but most notably, this will be information that will need to be relayed if an emergency response is initiated. So starting at the top of this section, we have the space to be entered. This is the name of the confined space where the work is being performed. Next is the location of the space. This space is reserved for the exact location of where this confined space is. Remember, depending on where you work, there can be several confined spaces in a small area, so make sure to be specific. Next is going to be our purpose of entry. This is where you'll give a brief summary of why we need to go into the confined space. So for example, this can be to perform routine maintenance, fix a leak, or repair damaged equipment. Next is going to be date and time issued. This is where you're going to record the date and the time of when the entry permit is being filled out, not when you expect entry into the confined space to begin. That difference is important to distinguish because of the next block, date and time expiration. If you take a look at the top right-hand corner of this form, you'll see that per policy, permits are valid for no more than one 8-hour shift. So that means our permits only have a lifespan of 8 hours. So once that 8 hours is up, the permit has expired and a new permit will need to be filled out. The next section asks about the department or the contractor. This is where you're going to note which department you're working for that's conducting the work. Even so, if you're receiving assistance from a contractor or you're overseeing confined space work that a contractor is doing, this is where you can record their company name. And finally, for section 1, the entrant and the attendant. This is where you're going to record who is the authorized entrant and the authorized attendant. Remember, this cannot be the same person. Section 2, requirements. In a nutshell, this section focuses on all of the requirements that need to be met prior to entry. So you're going to go into detail about what hazards an entrant might encounter and what we're going to do to protect them. In all reality, you can think of this section as a hazard assessment, and you're just looking for issues that can be corrected. Even so, at a minimum, the entrant, the attendant, and the supervisor should all be involved in this part. So let's start at the top of section 2 with actual or potential hazards. The difference between actual and potential hazards is essentially what the team is actually aware of versus hazards that aren't necessarily apparent but could pose a risk in the future. For example, let's say your team has to enter a manhole that's located outside right beside the street. An actual hazard could be the traffic that's around you while the work is being conducted. And a potential hazard could be a severe thunderstorm that develops halfway through the work being conducted. So in that scenario, your team has acknowledged an actual and a potential hazard. And now we need to put some controls around traffic and making sure that we're monitoring any weather developments. The next area is about special requirements and special equipment. Special requirements and special equipment are additional controls that we can put into place to help limit some of the risks that we've identified. A good way to approach this is think of this as a checklist. Does your team need special lighting? Does your team need airflow? Do we have a fire extinguisher? And anything else that might be specific for that confined space. If your department has any special requirements, make sure to specify that in the space provided. The energy isolated section wants to ensure that all energy sources have been identified and lockout tagout layout has been followed. So just like before, use this section as a checklist to make sure that each energy source has been properly de-energized. For any specific technical questions, make sure to refer to that equipment's lockout-tagout procedures, operation manual, or even manufacturer. So depending on where the confined space is, you might be limited on communication devices. So however you're going to communicate, make sure it's readily available, everybody's on the same page, and it's going to be reliable. The last box of section 2 is all about the PPE that needs to be used while the permit is active. For any additional PPE not listed, notate that in the other section. Before adding PPE as a solution to a hazard, verify that the hazard itself cannot be eliminated first. PPE is our last line of defense, and it should be the last option when nothing else is viable. Section 3, atmospheric testing. So when you get to this section, go ahead and jump down to the bottom. What we're going to do first is we're going to fill out the 4 pieces of required information that the form is asking for. This is going to be the make, model, serial number, and the unit's last calibration date. So if your detector has a calibration date that exceeds a year, or you can't find the make, model, or serial number, that device is not to be used. I want to quickly note here, using a multi-gas detector requires additional first-hand training with a competent person. So before you use a gas detector, make sure that you're properly trained, you know how to use it, and you understand the requirements. So for any detailed questions pertaining to this, make sure to reach out to the environmental health and safety team. So once the information portion is complete, you now can focus exclusively on atmospheric testing. At a minimum, you're going to be testing for the oxygen levels, the LEL or the lower explosive limit, the parts per million for carbon monoxide, and the parts per million for hydrogen sulfide. Document your results in the appropriate box, and then cross-check that reading with the column permissible limits to make sure that those results are acceptable. Remember, per our permit, you're going to need to retest the confined space's upper, middle, and lower atmosphere every 2 hours. So make sure you set an alarm, repeat this process, and document the results. Section 4, rescue. This part of the permit is all about detailing what are we going to do if we have to initiate emergency response. I will note here, UK employees are not permitted, trained, or certified in confined space rescue. Realistically, our role is to identify a problem and immediately call for help. So as we talked about earlier, having this type of information filled out and readily available will remove any confusion and help increase the response time. Remember, the quicker we call for help, the quicker help will get to us. The other parts of this section deal with any on-site retrieval equipment that first responders can use. This can be SCBAs, tripods, lifelines, and hoists. As for attendant requirements, per the entry permit, it is required that the attendant has means to summon rescue services. So however we're going to communicate with rescue services, make sure that that's documented in the space provided. Don't forget, before anybody enters into a confined space, make sure that you call the Delta Center at 859-257-2830 and notify the operator that entry is about to begin. Even so, this number will always be preloaded on these permits in the rescue section. Section 5. Authorization. This part of the entry permit is only for the entry supervisor. That's because they're responsible for ensuring that the permit has been completely filled out, the Delta Center has been notified, and everyone on the team knows their roles and responsibilities. Remember, when the entry supervisor signs this permit, they're saying, I have reviewed the work authorized by this permit and the information contained herein. This permit is not valid unless all appropriate items are completed. I certify that all actions and conditions necessary for safe entry have been performed. So remember, only the entry supervisor can sign off on an entry permit. And finally, section 6, cancellation. On this section being signed, the entry will be terminated and the confined space entry permit will be canceled when, number 1, the entry operations covered by this permit have been completed. A condition that is not allowed under this permit arises in or near the permit space. Number 3, re-entry into the confined space will not be allowed until a new assessment has been completed and a new permit has been issued. Upon being signed, make sure to give a reason for the cancellation, ensure that the permit is filed appropriately, and is kept for a minimum of 3 years. So after going through this training, if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, please reach out to the university's EHS department for any additional guidance or assistance. Now, stay safe and go Cats.